Today, we are kicking off our brand new series called The Goodness Factor. It is our walk through the book of Titus. Paul wrote this letter to Titus, who was a trusted follower, trusted advisor, a trusted ministry partner. We see Titus mentioned in the book of Galatians. We see Titus mentioned in the book of 2 Corinthians as somebody who helped Paul in a number of crisis situations in the past. And in this letter, we discover that Paul had assigned him to the task of going to Crete, a large island off the coast of Greece, in order to restore order to a network of house churches. And the reason Titus was such a great choice here is because Titus was a Greek person. Titus knew about Greek culture. He was a follower of Jesus that came out of this kind of Greek way of life. And so Paul sends him to the island of Crete, which is just off the Greece coastline there. And he says, hey, I want you to help put some of these things in order. And now, here's a question. When I say the word liar, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? I know that's a dangerous question. When I say the word liar, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it a person? Is it an institution? Is it a company? Is it, what is it? In fact, I know that when I said that word, you had something in your mind. Something came to your mind. Well, what's interesting about the word liar is that that's what Cretans were known for in the ancient world. In fact, the Greek word for liar was kritizo, which means to be a Cretan. It was so pervasive in that culture, in the ancient world, that everybody knew that Cretans were liars. In fact, one of their own historians, one of their own poets, one of their own kind of Cretan philosophers, Epidemius, which Paul actually cites here in Titus chapter 1, says that all Cretans are always liars, they're violent, and they're lazy gluttons, which is not a great endorsement for you as a people group. I just can't imagine saying, hey, all Americans are liars, and people being okay with that. People are like, you know what? He's right. He's true. That's true. We're all liars. But that's kind of the way it was for the nation of Crete. Cretan culture was notorious for lying. They were infamous for treachery, for greed. Most men in the island had served as a mercenary for hire. And the island cities were known as being very unsafe, being very plagued by violence, and kind of just pervasive with sexual corruption. That sounds like a lot of cities today, honestly, if I'm really going to think about it. However, the island of Crete had many strategic ports, and so Paul thought this was the perfect place. This is the perfect place to be able to set up a network of churches, to be able to get the message of the gospel on this island so in turn it could infiltrate the known world at that time. And so he thought this was a great place to start this network of churches. Now, we don't know all the details, but somehow these churches kind of came under the influence of corrupt Christian leaders. They said that they were Christians, but they were kind of ruining the churches with their leadership. So Paul assigned Titus to kind of go to Crete there to set things straight. And this letter provided the instructions. And we kind of get this thing out in the open, where Paul kind of starts off his letter with just some introductions about himself. Not that Titus needed to know who Paul was. Obviously, Titus knew who Paul was, but this was going to serve as kind of this justification, validation of who Paul was to the people that Titus was encouraging, to the people that Titus was leading. They probably had heard of Paul. Maybe some of them had known him. Maybe they didn't, but this was going to help them out. And so this is what Paul says right at the beginning of the letter. It says, this letter is from Paul, a slave of God and an apostle of Jesus Christ. I have been sent to proclaim faith to those God has chosen and to teach them to know the truth, the truth that shows them how to live godly lives. This truth gives them confidence that they have eternal life, which God, who does not lie, promised them before the world began. And now, at just the right time, he has revealed this message, which we announce to everyone. It is by the command of God our Savior that I have been entrusted with this work for him. And I'm writing to Titus, my true son in the faith that we share. May God the Father and Christ Jesus our Savior give you grace and peace. And then verse 5, it says, Titus, talking to Titus now. He says, I left you on the island of Crete so you would complete our work there. In fact, some translations say to put in order there, or to make straight there. In fact, that complete our work was this way of saying, hey, we started something. We need you to kind of go in there and continue the work. It was unfinished. We need you to kind of take it to the next step of completion. But really, the Greek word there is orthos, which means to make straight. It's kind of where we get our word for orthodontics. Right, to take something that's crooked and make it straight. And we this is really important. This is really important because we know that the Cretan culture were people who were corrupt, and that Paul was writing this letter to Titus to help to put in order some of the corruption that actually had invaded the churches in the Christian leadership in those churches. And so Titus was supposed to make these things straight. It's interesting that when Paul is giving him his introductions to this letter, he says, hey, I was sent here to talk about the true God, the God that you can find by having faith in Jesus. And this is the God, and this is what he says, and this is important because he doesn't say this everywhere, but he says this to Titus because it is so important to where he's going. He says, I've come to reveal this God that you can have a relationship with by faith through Jesus Christ. This is the God that does not lie. This was so important because one of the problems that in the Cretan churches was that they had kind of assimilated their ideas about Jesus with a lot of their ideas about the Greek gods that they had grown up with. Think about that. I think we can do that oftentimes, where we can assimilate some of our ideas about Jesus or our ideas about God with our ideas about culture that we have grown up in. Just think about how that may be true, and even in your life. It was so true in those lives of those people there on Crete. In fact, they were assimilating their beliefs about this Christian God, this God that you can have a relationship with through faith in Jesus, with their Greek gods, Zeus being their chief god. Now, Zeus was interesting because a lot of people on Crete believed that Zeus was born on their island. He was born on their island, and so they would love to tell these stories about Zeus and Zeus's underhanded character, how Zeus would seduce women and he would lie to get his way, and a lot of Cretans would actually take kind of some pride in the fact that Zeus was born on their island and he's ours and he's our God, and yeah, he seduced women and he would lie to get his way, but he was awesome. He was awesome. And Paul wanted to be really, really, really clear here. He says, the God revealed through Jesus is totally different. It's completely different. This is the God who does not lie. This is a God who does not lie. In fact, his chief characteristics are faithfulness and truth, is what he says. Which means that the Christian way of life will also be about truth. And that will be a real change for a lot of Jesus followers who had grown up on this island. So it was kind of a detachment saying, hey, you need to be a little bit countercultural, maybe a lot bit countercultural in this world in which we live, if we're going to really follow Jesus, if we're going to really follow this God, the real God that's revealed through Jesus. He's going to be very different than Zeus. Totally different. He's faithful. He's true. And so that's what it means to be a follower of him as well. And so what Paul does, he gives him Titus a twofold mission right off the bat. He says, hey, I need you to go there. I need you to kind of put some things in order. And in order to do this, you need to raise up some leaders. In fact, this is too big for you to do on your own. This job is too great for you to do by yourself. You need to raise up leaders, and you need to raise up the right kind of leaders. These are leaders who are good. This is probably leaders that you're going to have to kind of get rid of maybe some of the corrupt leadership that's happening in the churches right now, and figure out how to raise up some really good Christ-following leaders in the church. And this is what he says in verse 5 of chapter 1. He says, I left you there on the island of Crete to complete our work, to put back in order, to make things straight again, and appoint elders in each town as I instructed you. An elder must live a blameless life. He must be faithful to his wife, and his children must be believers who don't have a reputation for being wild and rebellious. An elder is a manager of God's household, so he must live a blameless life. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered. He must not be a heavy drinker or violent or dishonest with money. I mean, these are things, as we kind of go through this list, that it would be like, yeah, that would be nice for a leader to do. We would all love leaders to be blameless people, but at least we want leaders who are not prone to violence, who are honest with money, and who probably don't drink a whole lot. Just because that's going to hurt their leadership. So Paul outlines what these characteristics are of this eldership, and he's listing these things. But he goes on and says, rather, he must enjoy having guests in his home, and he must love what is good. He must live wisely and be just. He must be devout and disciplined. He must have a strong belief in the trustworthy message he was taught. Then he will be able to encourage others with the wholesome teaching and show those who oppose it where they are wrong. And so Titus's job, Paul says, is to appoint leaders, to raise up leaders, to appoint these leaders, and he gives this litany of characteristics, right? Blameless, faithful, leads his family well. He's not arrogant or quick-tempered. He's wise and he's just. He's devout and he's disciplined. He's not a heavy drinker. That should go without saying, right? He's not prone to violence. That should go without. He's not dishonest with money. He can be trusted with money. He is hospitable. He welcomes people into his home. Basically, raise up people who are totally different from normal Cretan culture. Raise up people who are totally different than normal Cretan culture. When we see lists like this, it is very easy for us to kind of almost say, you know what, that's not us either. In fact, I think leadership is one of those things where people kind of shy away from. We all want to be leaders. We all want to be in control, or we all want to have influence or impact or be a voice that somebody listens to. But sometimes we don't want to put in the character work that it is required for us in order to be a good leader. And so Paul, this is so awesome that he lists, hey, these are the things that a good leader is all about. These are the things that they are. These are the things that they do. This is the things that they care about. And we should all aspire to be this. In fact, this isn't something that he says, hey, just find whichever one you can find that measures up close enough to this list and kind of appoint them. Right? He's actually no, raise these people up, which kind of tells me that these are characteristics that we all can have. We can all live like this. We can all have this. In other words, we can all be leaders. But what happens is when we see lists like this, we tend to shy away. We tend to let other people step up. We tend to disqualify ourselves. We tend to tell ourselves that, hey, we're not leaders. Let somebody else do that. We don't want to do anything. We tell ourselves that we're not that type of person, that we're not good enough, or that we've done something that's been too awful, that we can't do that, or, hey, I don't measure up on this list at all, so I'm not even going to try, or that list is too lofty that I'm not even going to aspire to something like that. But I want to let you know that Paul says, hey, you could be this. In fact, we need this in our churches, is what he's saying. We need this in our churches. He's telling Titus, hey, you need this in your church, your church that's ministering, that's reaching people in a culture that is sexually corrupt, that is prone to violence, that truth is kind of just thrown around there, that we don't, people lie all the time. There's a lot of corrupt Christian leadership. You need to live in such a countercultural way that you need to be able to raise up good leaders, and we need these leaders in the churches. And I would say that we need those types of leaders in our church today. We need those leaders in our church, in one church. We need those leaders in the Christian churches of St. Louis, around our country, and around around the world. But so oftentimes we tend to disqualify ourselves and shy away. But there's one thing on this list that I really want to focus on today, and that is this. He has this litany of things, and he says this one phrase, that one of the things that these leaders need to have is that they need to love what is good. They need to love what is good. That's a powerful statement. You need to love what is good. In fact, in Romans, Paul talks about the same concept, and it says something a little bit different. Not only does he say you should love what is good, he says you should cling to what is good. When everything in life is coming against you and trying to persuade you or distract you or divide you or pull you away from what is good, you need to cling to what is good. You need to love it so much that you are not letting go. You're not letting go of what is good. You're not letting go of what is good. Now, I have a question for you today, because I think this kind of speaks into something I've already talked about. But do you want to be good? Do you want to be great? Who just wants to be? Like, I just want to exist. Leave me alone. I just want to be. But good, great. In fact, who wants to be perfect? Right? I had a lot of that in my life early on, and then I still battle that a lot. Is I want to do things so great that I want to be perfect. Well, Voltaire was an 18th century French philosopher, writer. He was a French Enlightenment writer, historian. He was famous for his wit. He was famous for his critique of the Roman Catholic Church. And he was famous for a few ideals that were prevalent in the French Revolution, the American Revolution. And we kind of see these ideas written into the framework of our historical writings. As a nation. In fact, these are the things that Voltaire is famous for. He's famous for his advocacy of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the separation of church and state. I think I've seen those things before in things that are in America, right? These ideals were such an important bedrock to some of our founding fathers' framing of America. And now Voltaire wasn't a believer. He was very critical of Christianity and very critical of the Roman Catholic Church at the time. But he was an advocate of freedom of speech. He was an advocate of freedom of religion, advocate of separation of church and state. And one of the things that he is best known for is this phrase that he wrote in 1770 in one of his journals. He says, "The best is the enemy of good." The best, or perfection, is the enemy of good, is what he says. That close is sometimes good enough, and exact is sometimes too costly. That close is sometimes good enough, so in other words, perfection, don't try to be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of good. That close is sometimes good enough, and exact or perfect is sometimes too costly. Well, centuries later, we had a guy, and this is a great book. In fact, if you haven't read this book, I encourage you to read this book. This book is very, very popular. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's by an author named Jim Collins. It's called Good to Great. And he kind of has a different take on this. He says good is actually the enemy of great. Instead of Voltaire saying, hey, perfection is the enemy of good, Jim Collins says good is the enemy of great. And in an excerpt of this book, Good to Great, he says, and that is one of the key reasons we have so little that becomes great. He says, we don't have great schools principally because we have good schools. We don't have great government principally because we have good government. A few people attain great lives in large part because it's just too easy to settle for a good life. And so this is his advocacy of saying, hey, don't just settle for good, go to great. He's challenging this sentiment or this philosophy from Voltaire, saying, hey, sometimes close is good enough. Sometimes close is good enough. Now, I think both of these men are onto something. I think sometimes close, I think sometimes exact can be too costly. It can cost us time that we don't have. It can cost us resources that we didn't need to spend. It can cost us something, but sometimes done is better. And we can fix it, and we can tweak it, and we can rearrange it. But here's the sentiment. Good enough is also a problem. Good enough is what Jim Collins is really kind of getting at. This sense of when people settle for good enough as the highest effort they make, then good will be the enemy of great. Good will be the enemy of great then. When we settle for good enough. When people try to be great at everything, though, they become scattered, and then that's being scattered is the enemy of great. And that's kind of one of the reasons why one of our values here at One Church is called focused excellence. We really want to be really good at just a few things. That means we're going to say no to some things that are not bad at all. Some really great things, some really great thoughts, but they're not things that we feel like God has called us to as a church. And so we really want to be focused and excellent on those things that we're focused on. We really want to be good. We don't settle for good enough, and we want to be great. But we really want to just kind of focus on what is good. Love what is good. And I think this is what Paul is saying for each one of our lives as individuals. Love what is good. Exact can sometimes be too costly. Scattered can sometimes be the enemy of great. Good enough is a mentality that none of us should espouse. None of us should have. Good enough is something. Settling for good enough is the enemy of great. But good is kind of redefined when we kind of see this list that Paul spells out here. Because if all of us would have read this list, we'd be like, man, I would take that leader every day of the week. Man, if we found somebody like that, not only would we want to follow them, we'd elect them to office. We'd do all kinds of different things, right? Like that list, that's a great leader. I don't know about good, but Paul's saying, no, that's good. That's a good leader. That's a good leader. And so maybe it's time for us to elevate our standard of good. Our standard of good. Because that goodness factor that Paul lists out, that characteristics of someone who really embodies being a good leader is so powerful, so impactful, that maybe it's redefining how we see good. Maybe instead of striving for perfection or striving to be good, we strive to be good like this. The other thing about being great is that, and being good, is that it says we all continuously need to be getting better and improving and doing a little bit more to develop ourselves. Good enough is a settlement in our hearts when we kind of give up trying to develop as a leader. When we give up trying to develop as a person and grow as a person. We say, you know what, I'm good enough. In fact, we actually judge other people, and say, hey, I'm good enough. At least I'm not like that person, or at least I don't do that, or at least I do, at least I go to church. I don't even see that person go to church, or at least I read this, or at least we kind of justify and measure ourselves with one another based on our definition of good. That we are good enough because of the other people around us in our lives. Well, what if we measured our goodness factor by what Paul lists here? Blameless, faithful, leads their family well, has kids that believe, is open, is hospitable, loves to have people in their home, wise, just, devout, disciplined, love what is good, not violent, not a heavy drinker, not dishonest with money. These are people who love what is good. But Paul puts this nugget in there at the end of verse number 9 that I want to kind of get into, because this is another thing that good leaders have to do, and this is something that we shy away from all the time. This is what he says. He says, hey, the good leaders must have a strong belief in the trustworthy message. We read this already, right? He was taught. Then he will be able to encourage others with wholesome teaching and show those who oppose it that they are wrong. Who likes to confront people who are wrong? Who likes to just, have a healthy debate with people who are leading people wrong? Not many of us. Not many people go out seeking for a feisty, lively debate. But this is what Paul says. He says, hey, good leaders are going to correct bad leadership. And he's talking about in the church. He's not saying, hey, go find somebody who disagrees with you and just blast them. Just go argue for the purpose of arguing, go debate with people who don't believe like you at all. No, what Paul is saying is, hey, there are corrupt Christian leaders, there are corrupt people in the church who are teaching false gospel or teaching things wrongly, and you need to have the courage enough to be able to stand up to them and to tell them, you're wrong. You're wrong. You're wrong. In fact, he goes on to say, for there are many rebellious people, this is verse 10, who engage in useless talk and deceive others. Remember, this is the corrupt Christian leadership that Titus has been charged with going in and straightening out and putting back in order. He says this is especially true of those who insist on circumcision for salvation. Now, in other words, there were ethnically Jewish Cretans who said that in order to follow Jesus, said that they followed Jesus, but similarly to the problems that were happening in Galatia, which might have been one of the reasons why Paul said, hey, Titus, you're the man for this job, because you saw what happened in Galatia. Something similar is happening on Crete. These people demanded that non-Jewish Christians be circumcised and follow the laws of the Torah if they really wanted to be followers of the Jewish Messiah, which, of course, anytime that you're saying, hey, people who aren't circumcised, in order to become part of our, following Jesus, be part of our religion, what we're going to need you to do is we're going to need you to kind of just line up and get circumcised. Like, you lose all of your male attenders right then and there. Like, they're no longer coming because they're like, nope, so not doing that. And Paul knew this. This was so cool because, Paul was both a Jewish person, but he was a Roman citizen. And so he had love for all people. And he saw, this is one of the reasons why God used him so mightily. He saw that God's message and faith through Jesus and salvation was a message for all people. For all people. And so he fought this so hard to say, hey, this message needs to go to all people. And that's why Paul was very instrumental in the first Jewish council where it was decided, hey, we're not going to make followers of Jesus. We're not going to make it hard for them to follow Jesus. We're only going to make them do a few things. And guess what wasn't on that list? Circumcision, right? We're not going to make them get circumcised in order to follow Jesus. And so Paul said, hey, Titus, you got to figure this out. You got to straighten this out. These people are teaching something that's wrong. In fact, in verse 11, he goes on to say this. He says, they must be silenced because they are turning whole families away from the truth by their false teaching. They're turning whole families away by their false teaching. And they do it only for money. Like, maybe you're watching this and you thought, hey, man, I don't know about church because, I just feel like they're always asking for my money. I feel like they're always like they're just trying to have their hands in my pockets, and they're just kind of in it for the money. Like that isn't a new thought. That isn't something that happened in the last 100 or so years, right? That didn't happen because television evangelists are on TV right now, right? That was happening in Titus's day, right? That was happening in Paul's day. That sentiment is always in us. Like, they're saying, hey, they do it for the money. And we know this. And this was Paul saying, hey, there are other Christian leaders in the churches who are only trying to do it for the money. Titus, you need to put that in order. You need to straighten that thing out. You need to get rid of those corrupt leaders. You need to stand up to them, and you need to tell them that they're wrong. And then he kind of quotes the Cretan historian that I mentioned at the very beginning. He says this in verse 12. He says, even one of their own men, a prophet from Crete, he's talking about Epidemius, has said about them, the people of Crete are all liars, they're cruel animals, and they're lazy gluttons. And then Paul says, this is true. This is kind of crazy. This is true. So Paul gives this instruction. He says, so reprimand them sternly to make them strong in the faith. That's such a powerful statement. Reprimand them sternly to make them strong in the faith. I have met so many people. I've had so many interactions with with people who, when you reprimand them sternly, it does not always make people strong in the faith, right? It usually makes people defensive and catty and kind of run away or kind of claw back, but it doesn't make them stronger a lot of times. We see this on the kind of sports field a lot, right? People respond to criticism in different ways, right? Some people you have to talk to them, you have to kind of coach them well. Some people you kind of get in their face and reprimand them sternly, right? And all of a sudden they can play better. But Paul is saying, hey, these are Christian leaders. They should be mentally tough. They've already had to sacrifice something. You need to reprimand them sternly. You need to get in their face and tell them they're wrong. Not to kind of tear them down and send them packing and kind of destroy their faith, but to actually strengthen their faith, to make them stronger so they will grow and develop as a Christian leader. Paul's not saying, hey, excommunicate these people. Paul's not saying, hey, these people are going to hell, just get them out of your church. There's no hope for them. What Paul is saying is, hey, you need to correct them and reprimand them sternly so that they will grow stronger in their faith. He says they must stop listening to Jewish myths and the commands of people who have turned away from the truth. Who have turned away from the truth. And so while these leaders kind of, they feel like they're leading people well, it's not right. And so Paul sends Titus in here to correct them. And he goes on, he finishes chapter 1 by saying these in these last two verses. Everything is pure to those whose hearts are pure, but nothing is pure to those who are corrupt. Nothing is pure to those who are corrupt and unbelieving because their minds and their consciences are corrupted. That makes so much logical sense, right? Nothing is pure to those who are corrupt because their minds are corrupted. Nothing is pure to those who are unbelieving because their minds are corrupted and their consciences are corrupted. They make decisions that are innately corrupt because they have just been pervaded with all this corruption in their lives. And he says, such people claim to know God. They claim to know God personally. They claim to know God personally, and they claim to follow him. But what Paul says is, they deny him by the way they live. They deny him by the way they live. It says they are detestable and disobedient, worthless for doing anything good. Paul was definitely not one to mess around and mince words and do anything of the sort, right? He was saying, hey, these guys are detestable. They are disobedient. In fact, these people who claim to know God, but by the way that they live, they actually deny God. They're making God unattractive. They're making it harder for people to follow him and to come to belief in him. These people are detestable. They're disobedient. In fact, they're not even worthless for doing anything good. You got to fix this, Titus. Here's how this applies to us. If we are going to reach our city, if we are going to reach our communities, we need people who are willing to be of good character and live good lives in a culture in which it may be okay just to be good enough. We need people who are saying, you know what? No, I want to elevate my definition of good. I want to elevate my standard of good. I see this list. There may be some things I need to develop at. There may be some things that I need to get better at. But hey, that's a constant process I'm willing to make because we need people. We need people in our churches. We need people in our communities of faith who are being raised up to be good leaders. If we're going to reach this community, if we're going to reach this city, if we're going to see people who don't know God, people who are disconnected with God, come to faith in Jesus, we need people and leaders who are being raised up to be good leaders, people of good character, who live good lives, and who live in such a way that might be countercultural to this sentiment of just good enough. And to do that, we need people who love what is good, who cling to what is good, who don't let go of what is good when things kind of get rough, who don't let go when offers come that can lead to corruption, who don't let go when things can kind of come and distract you and maybe even seduce you to saying, you know what, I'm going to give up that thing right now because this is a little bit more attractive to me. I'll come back to that later in life. No, cling to what is good. We need people who love what is good and are able to cling to what is good. And don't strive so far ahead of good that you can never attain it and you get discouraged. Focus on the good. We need leaders who are willing to put on their good reputations on the line to do what is good. That means willing to stand up for what needs to be stood up for. To be wise and to be just, Paul says. We need people who are willing to encourage people according to the word, right? This is why we have connect groups. Connect groups are so great. They're so powerful. It's such a great way to get connected to the life of the church, do life with other people, because you are being prayed for. You are being challenged to develop as in your faith, but you are being encouraged to grow, to be better. And as people who love you and care for you, a place where you're accepted, connect groups are the perfect place for that. And we need we need people who are good to lead people and to encourage people in this way. And we also need people who aren't afraid of confronting other people and other Christian leaders when they're wrong. You say, you know what? No, that's not helping people come to know Jesus. That might be good for you, but that's not helping people come to know Jesus. Maybe we shouldn't do that. There may be a time where you may have to sternly reprimand somebody in order for them to go stronger in their faith. And remember, this isn't just fighting anybody who disagrees with you. This is specifically what Paul is saying is in the church. There's people who are trying to teach maybe a false gospel. You gotta put that in order. But he says this: love what is good, cling to what is good, be known for what is good. Be known for what is good. I think that is so attractive when we are known for what is good. When people can look at those in the church and it's like, you know what? I'm not really sure I agree yet with all of that, with what they believe, but I tell you this, they are good people. They are good people. They are blameless. They are hospitable. They love to have people in their home. They're wise. They care about justice. They're devout. They're disciplined. They're not violent. They're honest with their money. They're not heavy. They're good people. Wouldn't it be awesome if those outside the church would be able to look at those inside the church and be like, you know what? Man, I don't know. I don't know about them, but one thing I do know is that they are good. They're good. Let's be known for what is good. Because I'll tell you this, if we are known for what is good, all of a sudden that's going to be attractive to people outside the church. That's going to be attractive to people outside the church. We can be known for a lot of different things, and we've had a lot of different things that we've been known as the church for a long, long, long time, and some of them great, some of them not great, right? But what if we were known for what is good? What if we were known to be people of morals, to be people of values, to be people above reproach? And here's the thing, what I love what Paul says about being hospitable. These are people who love to have people in their homes, right? And guess what that does? That you have to give access to your lives to do that. You have to give access to your lives to be able to have people in your home. And that's going to that perhaps is going to make you sacrifice some personal space liberties in order to do this. But here's what I know. In an age where everything's trying to be covered up and secrets are happening and and sometimes we sue and counter-sue in order to protect information, in this era where everything is kind of trying to be hidden, this idea of openness, of hospitality, of giving access to our lives, of sacrificing a little bit of our personal space, liberties, that level of transparency. Good people have nothing to hide. That level of transparency is actually going to be attractive to those outside the church. It's really going to help aid the message of the gospel and say, you know what? Man, they're good. They got nothing to hide. I've tried. I've dug. Hey, they're an open book. And I haven't found they're good. They're good people. Man, I want to hang around them more. Why are they so good? What is it in them that's so good? And all of a sudden, your influence level rises, your impact level rises, your leadership level rises. And guess what? The attractiveness of the God that has been revealed through Jesus that is at work in your life is all of a sudden elevated as well. And it's all because of your goodness. When you live those kind of lives, people will take notice of your goodness. It's time to raise the standard of good. It's time to elevate our standard, our definition of good. When we love what is good, when we cling to what is good, we can change the world. We can change the world. And Paul gives us this warning at the end of Titus chapter 1, right? He says, if you don't love what is good, how can you do anything good? How can you do anything good if you don't love what is good? So love what is good. Cling to what is good. Don't let go of what is good. Elevate your definition of goodness and be a leader of goodness. That goodness factor goes a long way in making the message of Jesus attractive to those who have not yet accepted it. Let me pray for you.